So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another event in the Leeds Festival of Kindness, Compassion and Wellbeing, otherwise known as the Kindness Revolution. And this afternoon, we are focusing on kindness a bit more specifically. I'm really delighted to have with us today Alison Murdoch, an old friend and colleague, was former director of Jamyang Buddhist Centre London at the time when I was director of Jamyang Buddhist Centre Leeds. So we worked together a lot then, and we're still working together, and 20 years later, still very good friends. So it's a real delight to have Alison with us this afternoon. And Alison has made a speciality, I suppose, out of kindness. I mean, there's a lot of work, especially in the Buddhist world, but generally on compassion. Fewer people, I think, working specifically on kindness, how to develop kindness, how it differs from compassion, and why we need it. And so I think we're going to have a really interesting presentation here about what is kindness in that nuanced sense, how it's different from compassion, and why we need to include that in everything that we do, especially in this festival. And also, I think more recently, Alison has focused a lot more on specifically kindness, more in the sense of kindness to oneself, and specifically for those in caring professions, especially the medical professions, but other caring professions as well. So once again, it's an absolute joy to have you with us, Alison. And we're going to first of all just hear a little bit from the audience here. We've got an invited audience of a few people who have specially asked to be part of this conversation, and who have an involvement one way or another in those caring professions or in the practices around kindness and compassion. So I'm going to just ask everyone to introduce themselves one by one, and here they all are. And who would like to start? It's always the tricky bit. Go on, Angela.
Hi everybody. Yeah, I'm Angela Green. So I'm working in the NHS. I've been working in the NHS 30 years now, both as a clinician and my background as a clinician, but also I'm a team lead at the moment for one of the community teams based in Leeds. I'm also one of the co-founders of the Leeds Kindness Revolution. So I'm passionate about kindness, compassion, and it is particularly hard caring and being kind to yourself. So thank you.
I'm going to call on you. So Carol Ann.
To meet myself. Hello. Yeah, I'm Carol Ann. I'm also part of the team organising the festival, which I'm very happy to be involved with. My day job is I am currently head of learning disability services for a third sector organisation in Leeds. So and I've been doing that particular job for 10 years. And prior to that, I worked for MENCAP for quite a few years. And I've also taught in that field. So that's where I'm coming from there. And obviously I'm responsible for managing a team as well as the projects themselves.
Thank you. I'm going to pick on Laura next.
Thank you, David, and greetings, everybody. I'm Laura Sims. I work in the new people team in the NHS, and specifically in the equality and inclusion team. I've got, like Angela, I've got a lifelong history of being a clinician in the NHS and my own lifelong journey with compassion and self-compassion. And I'm particularly interested in how kindness and compassion, particularly to ourselves, can help us to be kinder and more compassionate to other people, particularly people of difference. So I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you.
Andy, can we hear from you?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for this opportunity. So my name's Andy Bradley. I'm the founder of Frameworks for Change, and the mission of Frameworks for Change was to respond to the question, how can we close the compassion gap to make the world a kinder place? And that's given rise to notions of creating new platforms for people to come together in safe ways, such as compassion circles and festivals of compassion and kindness. And so these days I'm working more through the lens of place, so cities, towns, and been working with the country of Wales, the public health system there, around the adoption, particularly of compassion circles. And I'm going to be working with the NHS England team in the Midlands to roll out compassion circles, particularly in the mental health system. And I'm particularly interested in almost a kind of an addictive quality to helping others, the notion of sort of helpaholics, which I myself, I think, have lived with. So I'm curious to kind of explore why it is we become so bonded to the state of helping others and how that might make it difficult for us to develop a deeper relationship with ourselves.
Thank you. And Harsha.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Harsha Patel, and I run a social enterprise called Doing Social. And we're also partnering with Leeds Beckett University on a new degree in social change, which is starting this September. And I'm concerned our work at the university, this particular degree, is concerned with developing the next generation of change makers and leaders. People who are giving all their time to service. And my question really is, how can we teach self-care and kindness to people who often neglect their own self-care and self-kindness? Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody. So it's a really rich mix of backgrounds and people in the room here. So thank you once again for joining this this event. I'm going to hand over now to Alison to tell us a little bit more about her ideas on kindness.
Well, I'd like to start just by thanking you very much for this opportunity. As David knows, kindness has been a particular passion of mine for about the last 6-7 years, but a huge interest of mine for over 30 years. And I have a background in running frontline services for homeless people, emergency night shelters, day centres, and then also support organisations, which in some ways, as some people would understand, is even more challenging, supporting the people who are running day centres for homeless people. And then I've also run a sort of Buddhist-based community centre in the middle of London for 10 years. And then also developed an international charity called the Foundation for Developing Compassion and Wisdom, which is an educational charity and very much about building the kinds of skills that people need. So Harsha, I'd be interested to speak more with you about that if we get a chance. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, I set up a little centre in the town that I live in, Somerset, which is Frome, called the Good Heart. And it's a centre specifically to help people explore kindness in a range of different things. So, you know, as you can tell, this is something I really care about deeply. And I'm really interested in all the themes that you've already raised, everybody. And I actually think that it's one of those moments where I think, do I want to say anything? Because I'd like to just sit down and have a cup of tea and a conversation with you all. But I have prepared a few things to say to start off with. And we promised a mixture of research, discussion, and practical tools. So I just thought I'd start by sharing a little bit of my experience. And I would then love to hear your response to that. So I got interested in this topic about 30 years ago when I was running an emergency night shelter for the charity Crisis. It was situated in Tooley Street near London Bridge, which in those days was one of the roughest parts of London. It's quite weird now to see the street full of upmarket shops and offices. There's no room for homeless people there these days. And we took in 60 men and women each night. And I think it's fair to say they were destitute, they were desperate, and in some cases they were actually quite dangerous. They'd been so intensely affected by their experiences. And I had a highly motivated and skilled staff team, and I did my best to set up a balanced rota system with adequate time off, do a lot of team building, that kind of thing. People came into the job with love and determination. But even over 6 months, which was the length of the government funding we had for that project, I saw people getting exhausted. I saw them getting completely chipped away by the work. And I watched how we became hard on ourselves, and therefore we became hard on others. And that led to subsidiary problems such as disharmony, which then took up a lot of time and affected our well-being as individuals and as a team, and consequently our capacity to deliver the service that we really wanted to. So people came in with this great flame of kindness and compassion in their hearts, but found it really hard to maintain it, particularly in that kind of quite edgy, sort of very frontline service delivery. So since then, I've spent a lot of my time exploring what we need to carry on caring in the caring professions. You know, how we can have both a smart mind and a warm heart, because a warm heart on its own is not going to be enough to keep people going and to carry on. And as David mentioned, I'm also interested in the difference between kindness, compassion, and empathy. And one idea I'm just working on in my head at the moment is that if you took a clock, you've got kindness at midnight or midday, right at the top of the clock. And kindness really is this feeling of kin, this feeling of connectedness that we all have deep down that drives our wish to serve and to help others, this understanding that we're all in it together. And I find it interesting that kindness comes from Anglo-Saxon roots. And then one possibility, and this is only a proposition, is that at about 4 p.m. on the clock, you get compassion, which is generally sort of defined these days as the wish to do something to relieve somebody else's suffering, to act on it. It's a very active thing. And that's a Latin word. And you've then got empathy. And empathy is a Greek word, and empathy is about the understanding. In fact, probably I'd put empathy before compassion. I'd put empathy at 4 p.m. and compassion at 8 p.m. So empathy is an understanding of someone else's plight, which moves you into compassion. But for me, I really feel that it's driven by kindness. And I'm interested that kindness has had a little bit of less attention, particularly in research, than compassion has. And I spoke with someone about it, and they felt that this is somebody who runs the Compassion Institute actually in the States, called Tupten Jimpa. And his feeling it was because of the way that neuroscience has got involved with these debates, very, very usefully, and that compassion can be much more easily measured than kindness, because compassion is an action, whereas kindness is the feeling that it all stems from. Anyway, a few years ago, I was invited to facilitate a series of workshops around the UK for GPs who are experiencing stress by an NHS-backed organisation called the Practitioners Health Programme. I imagine Angela, probably Carolyn, me, Laura, you've heard of that organisation. And that was an incredible in-depth experience of the problems that people faced, which were very common among the GPs who attended and in many of the caring professions. Problems like an ever-increasing workload, more and more risks to manage, more and more paperwork, more scrutiny both from above and from the general public. You know, a sense of doctors' profile in society changing. My grandfather was a doctor. He was completely respected. Nobody would argue with him and say, "Oh, I've looked it up on Google." You know, and then of course the challenge that GPs get from the media. And there's a lot of research on this now. There's a professor called Jill Marben at the University of Reading who's made a specialism of supporting staff. And I heard her speak at a wonderful conference in October 2018 in London called the Wounded Healer Conference. I don't know if anybody here was at that conference. And she said to deliver good care, we have to stay in touch with our own humanity. And she was basing her presentation on a 3-year study that she published in 2012, looking at 4 different NHS trusts, where she explored the relationship between the patient's experience of care and the influence of staff motivation, effect, and well-being. And it's probably not a surprise to anybody working in this field, what she found that patient experiences are generally better when staff feel they have a good local work group climate, a good team, they have good co-worker support, they have good job satisfaction, they have a positive organisational climate, they get organisational support, low emotional exhaustion, and good supervisor support. And I would argue that all those things are common sense right the way across the caring professions. And they're very, very much tied up with this whole thing of being kind and caring towards the people who are delivering the services, which will then have an immediate knock-on effect on the people who we are serving. I mean, another angle to take would be the financial one, where PricewaterhouseCoopers, one of the big accountants, did a report in 2008 which found that healthcare providers can reap £9.20 in benefits from every pound invested in staff health and wellbeing programs. So if anybody needs to fight their corner with a finance officer, there's going to be all kinds of facts in this area. So from all kinds of points of view, from our own experience, from research, from financial, it makes sense to take the best possible care of ourselves. So why do we struggle so much with it? Now, I was brought up by parents who lived through the war. And when we were kids, I don't know if this is familiar for any of you, their instructions, their advice was stiff upper lip. That was the family culture. Don't complain and put others first. And if I had talked about self-compassion or self-care to my mother, she would have interpreted it as self-indulgence. And in fact, people often talk about having go and have a bubble bath or go to a spa for the day or something like that, which I really think is trivializing. It can be helpful. I find them very helpful myself, but it can be trivializing what's a really important issue. I think another one in our culture is that there can be a misunderstanding of the golden rule that runs through all religions, all the major religions, which is to look after others as you look after yourself, to love others as you love yourself. And it was also almost when I was growing up that we only heard the first half of that, love others. And there was nothing about loving yourself. And, it was that was actually seen as contradictory rather than complementary, rather than absolutely essential to do the two of them. And I used to laugh and I'd think, my God, other people don't want to be looked after the way I look after myself. That would be a disaster. I've had my times of long working hours and, close to burnout and the erosion of so many of my hobbies and interests. There's something called the exhaustion funnel from a professor in Norway. And she talks about how when you're really, really busy, you start dropping off things. So what do you drop off to start with? You drop off the things you find fun, the things you find relaxing, because you have to keep going with the work and you have to keep going with your chores. But I'm sure other people have also encountered that situation where the chores drop off as well. And you're maybe living with a partner who said, it would be nice if you cooked supper occasionally. It would be nice if you managed to make the bed or clean the room or something like that. Because we drop all these other things off. It's like a sort of inverted triangle. So we end up with nothing but the work. And we drop off all the things that really support us to do the work, that nourish us. And I'm sure many, many people, many of us have been in that situation. And my personal experience is that it doesn't work, especially in the long term. And especially if I really want to be able to model and epitomize kindness for the people that I'm working with. So anyway, that's just a few thoughts to start with. And I'd be really interested whether that resonates for any of you.
And I'm sure that some of you have got questions or observations or point of view to put. We really just want to open this up to a free-ranging discussion to explore these themes. And you've all got vast experience of this, so please let's just hear what you have to offer, and don't hold back, because it causes a problem. I'm going to have to edit out all the gaps, so just go for it.
Very interested in what drives us all to help others and bring kindness and compassion to others, and maybe not ourselves. And I'm interested in reflecting back on our childhood and our parents and our younger lives and our sort of roles in societies. And I've always thought compassion was around me because I created it for other people, and it's only been very recently I've recognised that didn't extend to me. So my life has been about learning how to be compassionate to me whilst being compassionate to other people. And I think kindness and compassion are very soft, fluffy terms, aren't they? They get bad press for being nice, fluffy things. And yet self-care, self-compassion, kindness often comes to boundary setting and sort of renegotiating relationships with other people that are maybe a little bit more balanced. And I love I love this quote from Brené Brown, and she said, if we're going to practice acceptance and compassion, we need boundaries. And she introduces another quote from Elizabeth Lesser that says, soft front, strong back. And I love that. It allows me to hold those two states at the same time rather than either or.
Yeah. Have you heard of the beautiful no and the unfaithful yes?
No, I will look into it.
Well, the beautiful no, which I'm working hard on these days, is the ability to say no to things so that you can do other things. But the unfaithful yes is when you say yes to something, even though it means that you're going to have to let somebody else down, lay another task, or maybe leave out something that was really important for your own well-being. So I've found the unfaithful yes to be quite a useful tool.
Thank you.
I wonder if there's something here around stories, Alison. I wonder if, thinking about Tooley Street all those years ago, it was very clear hearing you speak. It was hugely inspiring that this work was coming out of a very deep values-based kind of consciousness of loving kindness. And, you were describing your intention to, think very hard about people's needs and people's work patterns and supervision and team building. And yet I wonder if there was an imbalance where Tooley Street was really about the stories of the people who were homeless rather than everyone's stories. And that's something that I've enjoyed exploring in some of the work that I've been blessed to be involved with is, we've all got a story, haven't we? And in a way, we're all, not literally, but we're all metaphorically at times homeless. Yeah. And we might find ourselves on the wrong or right side of the tracks at different times in our life. And, how it is that suffering has entered our lives. And I wonder what your reflections might be, or others in the group, around the potential value in making more space for us to share our stories with each other.
I'm just going to say something briefly because I'd be really interested to hear what other people say about this. We had like a month to set this whole project up, convert a building, and because it was only for 6 months, we recruited quite a diverse group of people, which itself was quite interesting for the staff team. It wasn't generally people who were regularly, it was a bit Wild West, to be quite honest. And one of the things that I struggled with was a culture around boundaries and distances. I mean, Laura's brought that word up in a different way, but, a culture where you don't share anything of yourself in those jobs, and you certainly don't touch someone, don't even touch them on the arm. And I find that quite interesting. I think we've got a bit of settling down to do around some of those topics, because like you, I think this works well from both sides when you can actually bring something of yourself as a person to it. And I don't know if people are aware of the term moral injury. Have you come across that? You say, I think that's quite interesting, this idea that we experience moral injury when we can't bring all of ourselves to a task, when we can't do the job that we yearn to do. When a nurse hasn't got time to check in on an elderly patient who's lonely and struggling, or there's endless experiences, I'm sure, from MenCap, all the different organisations that we've been here in the NHS, and very much for GPs. And the latest research coming out of the States suggests that moral injury may have more to do with burnout than exhaustion. It's being able to be your best self in the job. And to me, Andy, that's something about being understanding the similarity between all of us, and being exploring these boundary issues. So, but I'm really interested what somebody else thinks about this. Anybody? I mean, it's quite a touchy topic, probably.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting, Alison, that it's almost like, I noticed kind of thinking about services and teams and cultures is when you bring a group of people together to deliver a kind of tasks or to do things to others, that then there's this almost immediate kind of perception and creation of a them and us. And as I completely relate to what Andy was saying about we're all us together. We all have our own stories, and yet when we start doing things to people in the caring profession, giving and sharing and helping people that move into a helping mode, there's something almost as it creates that distance between them and us, you know, and you're almost given, you know, our systems and structures and organizations give us job titles and a job description and labels, which also then serve to disconnect us or distance us from the person that we're giving care to, if that makes sense. Yeah, so sometimes I think what I'm saying is that our kind of structure of our organizations, are the nature of the way we work and governance and kind of, you know, regulation and our kind of fear about connecting with people somewhat as well, you know, it makes it more difficult to kind of keep that real connection in seeing everybody as equal individual human being in their suffering and knowing our own suffering as well in that relationship.
It's an interesting balance, isn't it, in a way, between humility and self-confidence stroke pride, both of which are important. You know, which is knowing that you've got something special to offer, particularly if you're a clinician, but equally being humble that you're at base a simple human being. And certainly the Dalai Lama always talks about, I am only a simple human being, and he says the minute I say I'm the Dalai Lama, it's a very lonely position to be in. And even if I say I'm a Tibetan, I'm one of a small group among 7 billion. But if somewhere we can accept our common humanity, then we're in a very nice position to serve people. And I think it's two-way. You know, I think it's really helpful to us as well. But it is complicated because obviously, you know, safeguarding boundaries, all those kinds of things are incredibly important as well.
I heard something interesting in what Angela said there around power and the giving of compassion and the giving of kindness. And I think there's a marvellous quote I don't have in front of me from Tracy Jolliffe, who's the head of inclusive system development in the NHS, around compassion is a gift that we give more readily to some people than others. And there's a notion, isn't there, that, you know, we can all find kindness and compassion for people that are like us, or that we like, or that we might on some level get something back. And I think the Buddhists teach us well through Metta Bhavana, don't they, about developing love and kindness for people we may never meet or that we don't like. And I'm interested in the power dynamic of gifting kindness and compassion.
Yeah, I mean, at the Good Heart, we started during lockdown running a morning meditation or morning reflective session for people every day, and particularly around kindness, obviously. And we often do an exercise where you imagine in front of you somebody who you consider a friend, somebody you consider close to, somebody you feel far away from, which could be a leading politician you disagree with or something. There's some quite powerful possibilities in that at the moment. And then somebody you really feel neutral to, you really feel disinterested in, you feel unconnected to. And it's really interesting to reflect on how easily those three can change places. You know, so someone who is your best friend was originally a stranger to you. And I don't know, you may have had this painful experience of a best friend then becoming estranged or a member of your family, or equally, you know, people, I find it really helpful to reflect on how often those different roles change. And I think it's really important with kindness, because true kindness has a degree of equanimity in it, doesn't it? It's not just kindness to the people that you like, or kindness to the patients you find it easy to get on with, or the members of your team you feel close to and that you've got something in common with. I mean, that's where it particularly links in with inclusivity and sort of issues of prejudice for me.
Yeah.
I have to say, I found it, as I've become a manager, I found that the most difficult thing, to manage a team. I think, you know, we all probably think that we're good managers. I think I am. I take great pains to make sure my team are happy, and they support them in their work. And I think I find myself doing things really that they should be doing, actually, but I don't want to. I do that. I don't want to alienate them, upset them, and because I have to say I have quite a good team, and it's a very small team of support workers, and good support workers, care workers, are very hard to find and nurture and bring on, because the care industry, for want of a better word, is not thought of. We've seen that demonstrated during this COVID in people who work in care homes and people who work within with learning disability, the same sort of thing. The culture is not supportive of people who enter that work. That's one of my campaigns, really, to get that sort of work valued, because it isn't valued in any way economically. It isn't regarded as proper work. Everybody thinks anybody can do it, and this isn't the case. And I find, though, actually, when I have had to look for people, and I'm glad to say I haven't, because my team stick with me. But then I question myself. I think that's because really I bend over backwards, and I shouldn't really have to do that. So I'm forever sort of trying to find that balance. But I would far rather take on somebody who might not have the a lot of experience or the qualifications, but they have the right, for want of a better word, attitude. Yeah. You can tell, so there. I don't quite know what I'm saying now, but
well, Laura seems to be the queen of quotes in this session, and there may be a quote for this, but I've certainly heard people say you can teach people skills, but it's much harder to teach them motivation.
Yeah, I think that I would agree with that.
And our whole education system, we see that there's much more emphasis on teaching from the head, which seems to be easier than teaching the heart. Yeah. The emotional hygiene, the emotional intelligence that people desperately need to be doing these jobs, and which somehow seems to be left out of a lot of our formal education system.
It's interesting then that Andy Bradley's compassion circles and spin-off compassion practices have taught me and teach others compassion habits and compassion practices. And I loved hearing about that, the challenge around balance. And I'd love to hear Andy's reflections, because I've experienced compassion practices, as others in this group have, to be very helpful in that balance and that flow between people.
So what to say? I mentioned it in my introduction that I'd worked with folks with learning disabilities for about 10 years, and prior to that I'd been very blessed to live alongside people in the later stages of dementia, as mum and dad opened our home and it became a care home to folks who were finding it hard to settle in other care homes in Herefordshire. And then my mum would get a call. So I was living with people who were known to be the most difficult people to sort of settle. And I guess witnessed, I think, very directly what happens when you love everyone. And people really were loved. And that's really what's driven the work, I think, is I'm aware of what Sharon Salzberg says. We don't have to like everyone, but it is a good idea to love everyone. And so I think, having had that experience growing up, I part of my conditioning was quite countercultural, because I was aware of how good it could be, how kind people can be when the conditions are favourable. And so that led to me becoming very curious about, were there certain things that we could focus on that became called the compassion habits, which Laura's referencing there, which then have driven multiple projects with staff teams and leaders in the NHS. And perhaps it's worth mentioning the habits. So the habits are listening with a quiet mind and an awake heart, because our tendency is, as people, to listen with a noisy mind. So that's really about space. Is how do we hold space? When the nurse is at the patient's bedside, is there a space? Because we can feel that, can't we? When there's a compassionate presence, regardless of the person's level of expertise or clinical role, we can feel people's compassionate presence. We know when somebody's really with us. That listening with a quiet mind, and then being really consciously curious. So the second habit is asking questions that matter. So I think again, when we're with somebody that we really feel valued and that they're with us and that they're in solidarity with us, then they'll ask generative questions and they'll make us feel like we matter. That might even be a very direct question like, what matters most to you today? You know, if nurses and doctors got used to asking that question, it'd be very healing. And then the third habit, there are only three, so I won't take up much time, is appreciating from the heart. So when we feel that heartfelt appreciation, and when perhaps a manager or a colleague offers that heartfelt appreciation to each other and makes explicit what might otherwise remain implicit, it seems to be energizing for people, and it seems to really help with people's, I don't know, kind of reminds people and re-hearts people into their values, reminds people why they came into nursing. And I know that Jill Maben's done lots of work around, you know, the way nurses' ideals get compromised and even crushed within just a couple of years of qualifying. So yeah, I guess that's one of the things that I'm become really passionate about, actually, is the potential value. So how do we create more favorable conditions for a stable field of kindness and compassion?
Yeah.
And then the response to that question is, what habits might help us to do that within the way we meet, the way we operate? And so that's given rise to the circle work and the compassion practices, which is a kind of an alternative to what can become, building on what you were saying, Angela, a very transactional kind of feeling in systems where it feels like we're data driven. We've become very transactional. There's low levels of relational intelligence. So yeah, cultivating those habits and being very disciplined and rigorous about it. So one of the things I speak about is the need for fierce facilitation or muscular facilitation, fierce compassion, fierce kindness, because if we leave it to chance, we're not safe. And then whatever's there around power will just play out, and the usual characters will dominate, whether that's around race or status or hierarchy. So yeah, cultivation of habits.
Fantastic. Andy, that's so inspiring. I'd love to speak more with you about it. Do you know the work of Robin Youngson in New Zealand?
Yeah, close to Robin. Yeah, amazing. Yeah.
He's been a great inspiration for me as well.
Yeah, Robin and Meredith. Yeah.
Meeting one time. So and you're quite right. I think there's conscious habits that we need to develop to counterbalance the stuff that's going on around us, and the fact that there hasn't necessarily been a strong emphasis on this in our working environments up till now. And that's what I mean when I talk about smart mind, warm heart. You know, it's bringing those two together in a really, really rigorous way. I imagine you're also aware of Kristen Neff's work, because I found that quite helpful. And, you know, these 3 points of acknowledging that something hurts. So we're not brushing it under the carpet. And I often, you know, certainly in the past, haven't even got to that point. You know, I'm very good at pretending it doesn't really hurt. And then secondly, that suffering is a part of life, that other people have the same experience that we do. So that makes the connections. And then thirdly, may I be kind to myself? And my experience is that very often involves forgiving myself, which takes us into a whole other area. But the ability to forgive ourselves for things, particularly in a culture where we've maybe, you know, adopted some quite unhelpful practices around guilt, you know, recrimination, self-blame, that kind of thing. The ability to forgive ourselves, I think, is also a large part of this whole topic.
And the way shame can take up residence when we're caring, because whatever we do, we feel like it's not enough. So that I think you know, together, if we can find a way to create deeper, safer spaces for people to talk openly about shame, and that, you know, the difference between guilt and shame. So guilt, I've done something wrong, and shame is I am wrong. So kind of that feeling of taking up residence, and how empathy, kindness, and compassion. It's a very deep challenge and deep question, sort of philosophically and practically, is how do I, and I'm kind of living through this myself personally at the moment, is how do I find a way to reconcile myself to the parts of myself that I don't feel good about, that I tend to disown. You know,
and without just pushing them away.
Yeah.
There's a range of inherited strategies, and certainly from my experience, you know, which is to ignore them, to be so shameful about them I can't even admit them myself, or to bury them very, very deep in the garden. Maybe that's why the English like gardening so much, because we're good at burying things. But I mean, just in the Tibetan language, there isn't even a word for guilt. It just doesn't exist. Sorry, Angela.
Yeah, it just strikes me of the kind of what we've talked about kind of identifying that need to create safe spaces that are structured, that can enable the idea of these things being seen as practice, you know, as in the word practice allows some flexibility in people's abilities. You know, some of these things over time are squeezed out of us, and it's a lot of our ability to give love and care for others. Some of it can be, you know, constrained, and then there's our own individual inner worlds that we are dealing with at the same time as well. But there's something really feels fundamentally urgent almost about creating spaces to explore practice, offer practice, which is, you know, why I've always been very attracted to the compassion circle work and the compassion practices, and the evolution and the development of the compassion practice collective, which I know Laura and Andy are linked to, and that's one of my reasons I'm doing kind of these kind listening circles as part of the festival and beyond, hopefully in Leeds, to see where that rolls out to, because it offers an opportunity for people to come together. But there's something about how can we make it that accessible, you know, how can we encourage people to step into those spaces as well?
Yeah, and that's where making time, realizing this is important, and making time is pretty much a starting place for it, isn't it? And certainly my work in the medical profession with the medics has been that so much time has been eroded, you know, from a clinician's day. And you know, the cup of tea that people might have had together, or time after work, or even time to say hello in the morning has been chipped away at. Harsha, you were going to say something.
Yes, thank you. It's been wonderful to listen to everybody, and I feel like I'm learning from everyone here. I have a question, and it's for anybody really, and it is directed at you, Alison. So, but anybody, I know that obviously Angela's got her circles, and Andy's doing some work, and you're all practicing compassion, kindness, empathy in so many different ways. And I'm sitting here thinking about people from marginalized communities, particularly refugees, asylum seekers, people from Black communities, brown communities, people of colour, Indigenous communities. How do you, and obviously in terms of the ideas of compassion, kindness and empathy, I think it resonates across different cultures. But I think in terms of the methods, the approaches, how do you feel that they need to be more nuanced to make circles and other spaces more accessible and inclusive to those communities?
Thank you. That's a brilliant question. I think I'm actually going to pull back from this one because all of you have a connection with Leeds, and your work is particularly in Leeds, Harsha. So I'd love to hear what some of the others in the group feel about it.
Harsha, it's a wonderful question. It's profoundly important that the values that have emerged that underpin the compassion practices collective and the compassion circles, building on something that you said as well, Alison, the first value is humility. The second one is courage. The third one, surprisingly, is discipline, which means if we're going to make a change, we have to be disciplined. Disciples follow a path. And then the fourth and fifth one, Harsha, which I think particularly relate to and might resonate with your question, are inclusion and justice. So I think this is about social justice. In terms of the practices of circle work, I have found them to be pretty robust and pretty structurally inclusive. I think, you know, there's some ancient practices like way of counsel in Indigenous cultures, which are, you know, literally or metaphorically around the campfire with a talking stick. That's that's pretty resilient to people's differences, that practice, because I think we're all longing to be heard, we're all longing to be listened to. It's such a relief when power is shared, because the compassion circles are very structured, so everybody gets the same amount of airtime, literally. So some of it is timed. You do work with partners, you appreciate each other, you go around the circle. And people so consistently report what a relief it is to be in a space not just of intended equality, but almost systematic equality and systematic inclusion. Where I get kind of excited is to work more directly with people who might themselves feel at the edges and really think about power, because the facilitator role is very powerful. The person who has the job of framing and taking people through the practices, and welcoming people in. So Angela and I have done lots of thinking about hosting and facilitation, and how do you create a safe space? So perhaps those two roles around who gets to host and who gets to facilitate, and working more directly with people who have experienced that feeling of being marginalized, discriminated against, and at the edge. I think for me that's like the next wave of the work, with what's happening with Black Lives Matter, with what's happening with the climate, the exclusion of disabled people, the exclusion of refugees and asylum seekers. So I think there's a really exciting potential in Leeds to actually really work directly with, hopefully not too many white men facilitating, but actually consciously looking to convene and invite and build up those relationships and that confidence, so that over time we'll see, a really wonderful diversity in who's hosting and facilitating. So those are my sort of first thoughts. How does that land with you, Harsha?
That sounds great, and I feel I need to be having conversations with you and Angela about circles. So I'm doing some research on circles and their connection with education, and supporting people from marginalised communities who can't access adult education for lots of different reasons, and looking at how they can, how circles can support people who are oppressed but don't understand their oppression and the injustices that they face, but just continue to, I suppose, be stuck in the lives that they're in, and not able to progress. So I'm really interested in how circles can be adapted to support their understanding of their lives, who they are, when in community, and to see what outcomes can be achieved in terms of developing their agency and sense of power.
Wonderful. Harsha, I don't know if you're aware, but there's a wonderful new educational program that's come out of Emory University in the States, and quite unusually is free of charge, one of those big American programs, and it's called C-Learning, Social, Emotional and Ethical Learning. And I know about it because the Dalai Lama's been involved with it. And it's aimed primarily at schools, but I think there's material in there that could be of interest and really adaptable for these purposes, and presented in a completely universal way. So,
thank you.
I think those of us that work in kindness and compassion also have a duty to help translate, don't we? Rather than offering something and saying, "This is great, come and get it." It's about understanding someone's world, whether that's an individual, a culture, a religion, whatever, however you are in the world. Compassion and kindness probably have something to offer you, but how you greet it and your relationship with it is going to differ from person to person. And I think there's something about understanding people where they are and what they need. And as Andy's talked about, having representatives that people can understand and respect and listen to. So my experience of compassion spaces is they are great levelling organisations. They're a great forum for people to come together and be together and learn about sameness and difference. But if someone's not going to step foot into that space for whatever reason, how do we understand who doesn't come to those things, who doesn't engage with compassion and kindness? What can we learn from them? How can we help? So I think there's an awful lot of learning we can gather in and share, and then there's always much more we can do around it.
One of the things that's emerging from this conversation for me, which I found so rich and helpful, I'm really grateful to you all for being part of it, is that it feels like this is an emerging field. It feels like we're working this out at the moment, at this particular extraordinary moment in history that we find ourselves in. And the coronavirus has just flagged up the importance of these issues. It's amazing how often I've seen kindness and be kind, just in the community around me during these times, and the need for us all to realize our common humanity and that we're all in this together.
Thank you very much, Alison, and everybody. That's been an extremely rich and deep discussion, and clearly we need to continue it as soon as we're able to do that. But this really was just a taster this afternoon, because we have every intention to invite Alison back very soon to she has a number of other sort of different workshops and activities and so on that she's able to offer. So we will keep you posted. If you've been involved in the festival, we will make sure that we get the word out. But we're hoping to have at least one more session with Alison later in the year, possibly a half day or a full day, looking at this very important question of how do we take care of the carers, how do the carers take care of themselves, and how does that important component fit into the job of taking care of everybody. So we have a society and an economy that has done most miraculous things in providing material well-being, but it's unevenly distributed. It doesn't guarantee mental and social and emotional well-being. And I think this is the next big challenge for humanity. So I think some of the conversations this afternoon have shown how centrally important that is. So I'm just going to ask Alison to just say a word or two more about those other offerings, and also just any few closing remarks to round off the conversation, and then we'll finish. Thank you.
Well, I just want to say that I've also found this a very rich experience, and I have so much to learn. All the things that you're bringing to it, well, things to learn from everybody, but it's wonderful to have been in the company of other people who share these priorities, and really hope that we'll have another opportunity to speak more and explore more together, because it does feel like that's what we're doing. Nobody's got the answer on this. We're all, as individuals, working it out and working it out together. I wanted to end with a very short exercise, which you may be familiar with. People know about the transitional pause. This comes out of the mindfulness stable, and I think it's quite a nice way of, it's a little gift to ourselves, and it's something that can be useful in all kinds of different situations. It can be used when you're doing a geographical transition, so you're moving from one place to another, and we often do that quite jerkily. We put our nervous systems through quite a lot, moving suddenly from one thing to another. Sometimes it's a cognitive transition. We're trying to move from one task to another. We've been intently listening to somebody, and then suddenly we're going into a meeting. And then sometimes it can be an emotional transition. So we've been dealing with something that was really difficult, or we've got something difficult coming up and we need to prepare for that. So just ask you to sit as comfortably as you can. And this is just based on 3 simple breaths. And I suggest we do it with the situation that we've just been in now. We've been in quite an intense conversation and probably going on to something different. So the first breath is just to really be at one with the conversation that we've just had, to feel our appreciation for it, to let go of any feelings that we have around it. So just to take one deep breath that acknowledges what's just passed. And then the second deep breath is to connect with where we are at this moment. It's often quite a good idea to look at our body. Are we tense? Are we relaxed? Where are we at this moment? And just to bring the mind back into the body for a moment. And then the third deep breath is to prepare for what's about to happen, for our next step. And to set our motivation that whatever we're going to do next, we will do with the most kindness and compassion and care that we can, and bring all of ourselves, both head and heart, to the next activity. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time this afternoon.
Thank you very
Hopefully we'll meet
much.
again.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Alison and David, and everyone. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much.